Good morning, everyone. So my name is Rachael Kangas. I know I've seen a lot of you on the Nahar calls, but I am the new regional director for FPAN West Central and Central regions, but I've been working with FPAN for about 7 years. So one of the projects that I kind of took over when I came in to FPAN in the West Central region. So I started working under Jeff Moats as the former director, and then he took another position and I got his job. So I kind of, when I came in working under Jeff, I was kind of starting to get into this project. And then now as the director, it's one of the projects that I am working to finish up. So basically we are doing a project with Pinellas County and the Pinellas County Planning Office, and specifically Tom Schofield, got a grant from the state of Florida, a small matching grant, and part of that grant it includes monitoring of archaeological sites. So I'll go ahead and I'll share my screen and kind of take you through at least my half of this grant. So let me get this shared. There we go. So this morning I'm going to talk about integrating site monitoring into planning in Pinellas County, Florida. As I mentioned, my co-author and my colleague Tom Schofield, who's the principal planner for the historic preservation, for Pinellas County Planning Division. He couldn't be here today. He was going to do the presentation with me and really focus on the planning and the historic preservation side of this. So he is a wealth of knowledge, and if you have questions that I can't answer about that side of this, I'm happy to kind of relay them to him. And I think it would be great in a few months if we could have him on and kind of explain in a little more broad terms kind of his whole plan for the planning in Pinellas County. So like I said, Tom got a grant through the state of Florida for looking at the future of kind of historic preservation and vulnerability studies in Pinellas County. So he got a larger grant that has a couple different sections to it. And my job is to cover the archaeological portion of that grant. So I'm going to kind of talk about phase 1 that was completed by Jeff Moats, our former director in West Central and Central regions of FPAN. And then I'll talk about what we're currently doing in phase 2 of this project. So before I begin, of course, I want to make sure and mention that all of Florida, all of the United States is native land. In Florida specifically, we are on the traditional territory of Seminole Tribe of Florida and the Miccosukee Tribe of Indians, and ancestors of these and other living indigenous groups that have lived on this land for generations. So, the Seminole Tribe are still, here. They are a really fantastic group of people. I really love all the opportunities that we get to work with them. And it's really important in our work as archaeologists that we always keep in mind that, this is not our land, this is native land. So you can learn more about the Seminole Tribe. They have a newspaper, that comes out regularly. While I don't enjoy showing, the pandemic times, but, it's an active, living group of indigenous people, which unfortunately is really important to say, because that's a misconception that a lot of people have when we talk about archaeology, that there are no more indigenous people. So I want to make sure and mention that and give you some resources for more information on the Seminole Tribe. And then this is a really great map that covers a lot of the US and kind of can show you the native land that you are on and give you some more resources on that. So to switch gears a little bit and talk specifically about Pinellas County. Every time I give this, I forget to give a map of where Pinellas County is, because I always assume everyone knows what Florida looks like. So I'll show you a map of Pinellas in just a second. But we're in Florida on the West Coast near the Tampa area. So when we talk about archaeology in Pinellas County, so the county is a certified local government, and within their county historic preservation ordinance, they define archaeological and historic sites as helping to promote the health and the cultural, moral, economic, educational, aesthetic, and general welfare of the public. So This is kind of part of becoming a CLG in Florida. You know, you need to have a historic preservation ordinance, and I think it's really nice to see, you know, kind of codified into that ordinance why archaeology is important to the county. So when we talk about threats in Pinellas County, it is a coastal county, and 60 of, well, let's back up from the 60s. So they have over 480 archaeological sites that are documented in Pinellas County. 62 of them have been evaluated as being significant, and 60 of those 62 sites are located within the FEMA special flood hazard areas. So they are innately vulnerable to shoreline erosion and sea level rise, and at threat from, or are vulnerable to these threats. So a lot of these sites in the county are within parks and other open space areas that make them predisposed to the accumulation of storm debris after major disaster events. So not only are we worried about, you know, the erosion and sea level rise and, you know, other climate change effects kind of slowly eroding or sometimes quickly eroding those shorelines, but also because these are open areas, we really have to think about disaster management and what happens after those storms, because these are kind of natural areas for that debris to gather naturally and to be purposely gathered by people who are looking to move debris into a space. So I'll talk a little bit about that later. So when we talk about flood risk in Pinellas County, sorry for the boring graph, but we've all seen this graph, you know, hundreds of times by now. But for Pinellas County, local governments in the Tampa Bay region, which includes Pinellas County, should plan for a range of sea level rise between roughly 11 and 31 inches by 2050. So that's in 30 years, we're going to see at least 11 inches of sea level rise. And this is according to the 2022 NOAA report. So I've got the sea level rise viewer that, in case you don't know, is open access. Anybody can just Google NOAA sea level rise viewer and look at your area and watch it flood. So this is our current sea level. So Tampa is over on this side. Again, sorry for not giving you a full Florida map. And then this is Pinellas County, is this peninsula right here. So we've got St. Petersburg right here. So this is our current sea level. If we look at 1 foot, which we could very easily see by 2050, you can see all of the inundation around the coasts and on the barrier islands in Pinellas County. And then if we go up to 6 feet, which is a little bit further out in our, let's see, where's 6 feet, right around here. So it's a little further out in our planning horizon, but you can see some really significant changes in the coastline of Pinellas County. So, you know, these are the risks that we're dealing with as a county. This is what the historic preservation planners and all the other planners are kind of thinking of is, you know, as the coastlines change, as the entire environment in Pinellas County changes, how do we address all of the vulnerabilities that we have in the county? So of course, as an archaeologist, I can help with the archaeology parts of that. So, and this brings us into kind of the larger grant that's been going on for a few years now. So it's the grant is called the Historic Resources Survey of Flood Hazard Areas. And we at FPAN have been a part, and at USF, I should say, have been part of the archaeological project component. So there's also a structural survey that's happening and other projects that are happening. So, but we are specifically involved with the archaeological project component. So I want to go over phase 1, which Jeff Moats completed and colleagues completed. And then I'll go into phase 2, which is what we're currently working on. So in phase 1, you know, of those 480 sites, 62 of which are significant and 60 are in the special flood hazard areas. For phase 1, they used 23 sites to survey for vulnerability and condition assessments. So they looked at 23 of these sites, and I'll talk about exactly how they did that in just a second, but just want to show you kind of so you can get an idea. These sites go all over Pinellas County. This is a really effective survey, I think, for, you know, figuring out what's happening on the west coast of the county, what's happening on the east coast, and this is Tampa Bay in this area. So really getting an idea of what's happening to the coastlines all around the county. So there we go. So most of you are familiar with the Heritage Monitoring Scouts. This is a program that FPAM put together in 2016, and it's a citizen science monitoring program. So HMS Florida, or Heritage Monitoring Scouts, as you may know, it's a map-based inventory, and you can go into sites and get, you don't need to be able to read this, but basically get and record their conditions. So you go in and you say, you know, did you find the site? What did the site look like? What threats did you see? What priority would you say the site is? And then you can also upload photographs straight to the database. So for phase one, what they did was they basically took the HMS Florida template and vulnerability assessment, and they kind of just tricked it out a little bit and made it a little bit longer, added a couple more questions and things to look at. So they created this vulnerability assessment form, again, based on the HMS Florida form. So they are looking for visible archaeological materials. Again, no excavations, no ground disturbance in phase one. They looked at the position of the tide. They looked at vegetation health, which is something that HMS doesn't directly ask for, although I've worked with a lot of folks who talk about vegetation in the notes on their forms. So they looked at species and percent cover, again, as a way to kind of look at how these change over time. And then they used a threat scoring system. So they looked at 10 threats or site hazards and ranked each with a score from 0 to 5, and that gave them their threat score. So this is the threat score sheet, and in the red, we've got the highest scores. So again, they looked at all of these different threats, they scored them, and that's how they got this total threat score. So of those 23 sites that they looked at, they went out to the sites, they completed the forms. At a few of the sites, they also did some more intense surveys. So at sites like Safety Harbor and a few others, they went and they put in cross-shore profiles. So this is a very large site. It's in a public park. It's called Philippi Park in Pinellas County. It's a gorgeous park also. There's this large mound that is right on the water. This is Tampa Bay over on this side. So currently there's a large seawall that goes around this point, and then basically at the site where the seawall ends, which is right around here, they put in a transect so that they could create a cross-shore profile. So they put in a transect, and then they did a drawing of what's basically where the water level is, some of the different vegetation, and all of the elevations up to this sidewalk right here. So this is not at Safety Harbor, this is at a different site, but this is kind of what it looks like when they were doing those cross-shore profiles. So they pull a level line, they take regular measurements to get kind of this just basic data. What does the topography of the site look like now, so that we can come back and redo this over time and see those changes. So that was phase one. They went to those 23 sites, they did the threat assessments, they did some of those cross-shore profiles. And then for phase two, which again is the phase that we're working on right now, we are going to the 12 highest threat scored sites, the 12 sites that had the highest threat score, and we are implementing different monitoring strategies. So the idea is at these 12 sites, we are trying to implement strategies that can be used for years to come to look at the same exact places and look at how those places are changing. So we've been out to a bunch of these sites, and a lot of them are in public spaces. So we have people kind of coming up and asking us about what we're doing and about the project. So I've been kind of explaining it as sort of a twofer project. So not only are we getting information about the specific archaeological sites that we're at, but it's also giving us an idea all around the county of how the shorelines and coastlines are changing. So this is not only helpful for archaeologists, but it's also helpful for the county and for future planning in general to see how these coastlines are changing. So our documentation strategies, and this is really the part that I would love to get some input in and to talk more about if anybody's interested in this. So basically, Jeff and colleagues in phase one came up with these implementation strategies and kind of these monitoring strategies that we're now actually installing into these different sites. So we have 4 different ways that we are monitoring and documenting these sites. All of them are in coordination with landowners and land managers. Most of the sites are on either county or city property. There are 2 private property owners that we've been working with as well. So we wanted to come up with kind of a variety of different techniques to monitor these sites over time that would serve a variety of different roles for, specifically the data and the science and the numbers part, but also community engagement, and of course, being sensitive to land managers and homeowners' needs and desires. So one of the documentation strategies is the physical datum monuments. So we have these, they're about 3 feet long. They're concrete monuments with rebar in them. We got brass pins that we inserted into the top, and this is one installed right here. So they are completely flush with the ground. The idea behind the size of the monument is we don't want them to move. Most of this soil is pretty sandy. And I know that when, at least in prior projects that I've worked on in other places, when we've put rebar, the rebar can sometimes shift. So we wanted to avoid that. So we went with these monuments, and also we can have that nice datum. So our datums are about this big in the top, and we've got information about the kind of generally the survey project, and then a phone number for people to call if they ever, find the survey marker or have a question about it. So the idea behind the monuments, the data monuments, is you put them about 5 meters apart. And the idea is you put 2 of them in the ground. And then every single time you come out to the site, you don't necessarily need a compass. All you really need is a measuring tape. And as long as it starts at one and goes over the other, you can always pull the exact same line. So I've worked on other monitoring projects where we just have 1 point and then we rely on a compass bearing. And that can get really, really confusing really quickly for, we have volunteers involved with in some of my past projects. So that can get really confusing if folks kind of forget how to use the compass. And also, rebar interacts with compass bearings. So if you get too close to the rebar, that will skew your compass. There are all sorts of, levels of error that we get with that. So we're hoping that having these 2 immovable datum points will help to kind of reduce some of that, that range of measurements and that kind of range of error that we get with some of the other strategies that I've used in the past. So again, that's the idea with the datums. You have 2 points that don't move, that are far enough apart that you can really, tell that you're on the right line. You pull a line just to the water's edge, and you, at the very least, document where the water's edge is. And then you can also use these 2 datum lines to set a level line like we see here. So again, this would just go over those 2 datum lines on that same transect, and then you can actually create a topographical map like I showed you a minute ago and actually look at the changes in the shoreline. So this is what we're doing at a few sites. We're also doing just mapping at a couple sites. A few sites are pretty remote and are mapped incorrectly in the Florida Master Site file. So it's just really important that those get correctly documented, again, so that we know where the sites are, where they are in relation to the coastline and the water. There are 2 specific sites that are that we're mapping that are currently mapped in the water, and from visiting the sites, we know that they are not in the water. So that, that couple of feet, or, it's probably a couple dozen feet, really changes how we think about that site and what the threats are to that site and what kind of priority that site might be in the future. So getting those mapped correctly is really important. And we're also using mapping on some of the private properties so that we're not, installing a datum monument in someone's private property or something that we really need to get back out and access. The idea on the private property is, again, to avoid installing something that people will have to, then deal with, but to still get that data. So we're using an RTK GPS system in order to map the shorelines. And on the 2 private properties, we've got one that's pretty exposed to the water and another that has some riprap and a seawall. So we're kind of looking at those different strategies that people are implementing to see how they are affecting those coastlines. So that's 2 of our strategies. The other two, again, in coordination with landowners and managers, are photo stations. So we have 2 sites that we're installing photo stations at. They're really simple. I'm really curious to see how they fare. But the idea behind the photo stations is more of a public outreach aspect. So these 2 are at sites that people regularly visit. And the idea is to get, of course, the same photograph over time. And again, to kind of involve the public with this project. This is a project that ultimately is aimed at helping the county and the people that live in the county. So kind of having that public involvement is really important. So, so these are some photos that were taken at a park called Maxima Park over the last few years. This is by FPAN staff, but we're installing a photo station that should get the exact same picture over, the next few years. So we created signs, went through a whole research phase into photo stations, if anyone is curious to talk about that. And what we decided to do was to create a JOT form, which is kind of like a Google form that you can attach pictures to. So people can just scan the QR code that's on the printed sign. It'll take them to a form that asks them how the site looks, what threats that they're seeing, and then to attach the photo that they took on the bracket. It has instructions on kind of where to put your phone and how to use the photo station. So again, we'll see how these go and how these fare, but I think this is a really exciting part, especially of the public outreach aspect of this project. And then at a few sites, we are doing some testing. These are for the sites that are mapped in the incorrect place on the master site file. They're both pretty ephemeral and we're not exactly sure where they end. So we're not doing, large scale excavations, but we do want to get a good definition of where those sites actually begin and end. So we're gonna be doing some coring basically with these small cores like this, just to see, is there a site here, is there not, and then get, again, a better map of where those sites are. So those are our 4 implementation strategies for the documentation of these sites, or of these 12 sites in Pinellas County over time. So the idea behind this project and kind of how this helps with planning, first off, as we all know, numbers are very important, and it gives us those numbers. So it gives us a way to score, using quantitative methods to score threats, to score how things are changing, to physically, to measure how coastlines are changing over time, which I'm sure, anyone who's talked to an elected official or someone, who is not steeped in this information all the time, those numbers can be really helpful to just talk about, we are losing a foot of this site, or we lost, a meter of this site, or what have you. That can be really, really helpful, along with, the pictures from the photo stations and from our monitoring efforts. So just giving us numbers, that qualitative and quantitative, that we can put together to talk to people about these threats and the changes. Also, the survey, the archaeological site vulnerability, is one of the first steps to creating a historic resources data layer that the county wants to incorporate into their GIS resiliency database. So this is really cool, and Pinellas County is doing some really incredible things. So it's not unusual for a county to have a GIS layer, but they're specifically using these layers plan for resiliency and to look at vulnerability and to figure out, what they're gonna do, how they're gonna change in the future, and what they're gonna do to adapt to the threats that we're seeing on our coastlines. So this is a really exciting part of this. And when you talk to Tom Schofield, my colleague at the county, he has these really grand plans for for this database that is not only useful to the county and the planners and kind of the folks at that county level, but that in a different way can also be used by folks in the public and in different places to kind of look at a historic site, look at some of the changes to that site, see what it looks like, kind of get some ideas about how it might change in the future. So Tom's got some really incredible kind of long-term goals that I'm really excited to partner with him on in the future. So that's part of it too, is creating this GIS resiliency database layer that the county county staff can access. So when they're looking at places after hurricanes to move debris to, they are not choosing sensitive archaeological sites. This is a photo from Southeast Florida after, I think it was Hurricane Irma. They were, there were a bunch of trees that had fallen and they needed a place to put them. And the only green space in the area was this mound site. So, so they were using heavy machinery to push fallen trees and limbs and debris onto a sensitive archaeological site. So this obviously is something as an archaeologist that we don't want to see, as a preservationist, we don't want to see happen. But it's also makes a lot of sense that folks who are just looking for a green space, right? If they don't know that it's an archaeological site, it makes a lot of sense to use that. So that's part of the way that this GIS database is going to help. So when they're planning for these things, before they happen, when they're planning for storms and things like that, they already know, like, okay, we're not going to go here because that's a sensitive site, but we can go to this field that is not a sensitive site. So kind of getting all that information and getting all of these people to kind of talk with each other and understand all of these things from one simple, GIS database. So this knowledge and this information that we're getting from this project also, of course, enhances our baseline knowledge about the sites and provides a platform that which we can, a platform upon which we can monitor future changes. So this is that site of Maximo Park. So this is the photos that we've taken, well, that FPN has taken over the last many years. This is what the site shoreline has looked like. So they went out in 2009, 2012, 2017, and then they projected 2020. So these are the two of the transects that we actually installed datums on so that we can continue to measure on these exact sites how this shoreline is changing. So getting this information, this multi-year change, is really important to helping people understand the changes that are happening in the coastlines. And then this is more of a Tom specialty, but this whole project, this grant project, is part of the long-term planning of Pinellas County for vulnerability assessments, for resiliency, for adaptation. So basically doing these projects now are building on projects that the county has done in the past that allowed for the funding of this project. And then doing this project now is going to open up funding in the future because, FEMA and resiliency planning buckets of money, they're not going to give you, or typically they do not allow funding for, for an adaptation strategy before you have actually assessed what the vulnerability of a site is, right? So you have to kind of do these things in steps. So this is one of those steps along the way for the long-term planning of Pinellas County. So again, doing this is one of those steps that's opening up other federal monies, other state monies for future adaptation planning and management. So that's kind of my quick overview of what we've done. So I want to again thank Tom Schofield at Pinellas County. I have two fantastic undergraduate students that have been going out with me and installing these different monitoring systems. So thank you to Anise and Tyler for all of their hard work. And there have been dozens of people involved in this project along the way. So really, really happy to be a part of this and to be kind of continuing this work at FPAN and with Pinellas County.